started right now. So welcome everyone to our programming workshop. There's such great energy in the room. Let's stop chatting. We're going to try to have a somewhat informal conversation around the table. So please interject with questions. And as we work through things, we don't have a podium purposefully because we're going to probably have a lot of interaction among staff, kind of tag teaming on things. So hopefully that all works out. And Ivan is going to run the mouse and computer for us and change our slides for us and present as well. We do have, Heather said we have plenty of drinks in the refrigerator. There are some snacks up here, so please help yourself. We feel like about 3 hours of content for you today, 3 to 4. So we'll at some point stop and have lunch, and if we have to finish up after that, we may take a few minutes not on record to have lunch. So we had the issue of chip bag noise in the past, which anyway, so we'll at some point we'll decide what the right timing is, and we'll take a little break for lunch. If we need to keep going after that, we will. So we'll figure that out when we get there. Ivan, maybe if you could just go ahead and go to the. Oh wait, I said. Do we want to do introductions around the table?
In person that we didn't introduce. You want to raise your hand? There you go. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Dan. I'm just super excited to see how this all works.
Hey, Dan.
Dan is the man.
So I wonder if maybe we should go around the table quickly and then quickly online, so the people they have a hard time deciphering who's sitting around the table when they're online. So maybe should we just go around quickly? Nate, do you want to just start? We'll just go around the table.
Sure. Nathan Lee, I'm the Director over Technology and Innovation.
Carmen Swanwick, Director of Project Development.
Troy Peterson, Operations Director.
Rob Clayton, I'm the Regional Director.
Jim Evans, Transportation Commissioner, representing the state and Region 3 specifically. Good to be here.
Lisa Wilson, Deputy Director, Engineering and Operations.
Sharon Hill, your Finance Director.
Nagi Sinadi, the lucky one to chair the commission, the wonderful commission that we have. I came for the free lunch.
Good morning, I'm Monty Aldridge, Region 4 Director.
Donna Law, Transportation Commissioner. I'm a Commissioner at Large.
Robert Stewart, Region 2 Director.
Terry Newell, Deputy Director of Planning and Investment.
Rhonda Menlove, Transportation Commission Member, Region 1.
Rob White, Region 1 Director.
Heather Barthold, Commission Assistant.
Peter Asplund with Policy and Legislative Affairs.
Dave Felder, also Policy and Legislative Affairs.
Ivan Hartle, Financial Programming.
I know maybe online, Commissioner Van Tassel.
Yes. Kevin Van at large. I'll be joining you tomorrow.
Okay, great. Carrie Ann, you're in the room also. Yeah, Carrie Ann's in the room also. And Grant is in the room or on just online? Grant? Okay. And then Chris.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Anderson. I'm Rob Clayton's assistant.
Okay. So Ivan, you want to go to the agenda, please? Okay, so we have it laid out here, and we are known for liking to check the boxes as we finish things. So this makes Lisa happy. We can check a box when we finish an item. So we have 6 items. We're going to work our way through here today. We're going to start out with the process overview, which Ivan's going to lead us through, remind us what we're doing today, and then what happens after this. Leif's going to take us through the legislative update. Shara's going to take us through at the kind of beginning of each section, the financial piece of it, and then we're going to talk about projects that came out of legislative session, and then we'll talk about the program. Nate's going to lead us through a discussion of how we fund our assets, taking care of our assets, and then we'll finish out with our TIF, T-TIF, CC-TIF, and A-TIF. So, any questions, concerns about the agenda? That is the Cottonwood Canyons Transportation Investment Fund. Thank you.
That's all this year.
Which we are not authorized to use unless it's appropriated to us specifically. So there was, we'll get to that in one of the slides. There was an appropriation for us to use out of it.
I just didn't have that in my flashcards.
Yeah, because you guys don't have the authority to program from it. Unlike the other TIFs, you have authority to program from those. CC TIF, you don't unless it's specifically appropriated.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, with that, you do the handoff to Ivan for process overview.
Okay, good morning. As we've done in the past, just to go through and talk about the authority, where that's coming from under our Utah code, talk about the duties of commission. There are other things in this subsection 1. We're just focusing today on A and C to determine priorities and funding levels of the projects and programs, and to hold public meetings to provide public. Under our transportation commission policy, talks about the transportation fund and the transportation investment fund, the programming approvals that we're going to be walking through today. And then the future goal, the ending output of this will have our draft STIP compiled so we can approve to submit to Federal Transit, Federal Highways later on in the process. So here we are, beginning in March. Our goal today, our commission workshop program review, where we'll be talking about the individual programs for the department, with the discussion about those programs and the recommended funding approvals. And then when we come back in May, we'll review in a workshop the projects that are associated with those programs that we're going to discuss. But then also on the following day, on Friday, seek approval for those funding levels for those programs. There's our process over.
Check. Lisa, there was a check in the box. Yes. And welcome, Carlos. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Was that sincere?
Yes.
We're all bad.
Sorry. All right, moving forward, is that right?
Yes.
We're gonna work on this next box, legislative update. And I'll just have this up, this kind of shows you the legislative cycle. I'm not gonna talk too much about it, but we're moving into the interim phase. We just finished the session and we're working on implementation, and then kind of starts over there with the interim and then governor's budget and so forth. So, but I just want to take a second just to kind of give you the high level, what was the biggest thing in this session? And from my perspective, this is my second year doing this with UDOT. I was at one time worked for the legislature and was the transportation policy analyst. So I've kind of been around and seen and heard what's the comings and goings and so forth. But I think the big thing for me was the continued commitment of the legislature and the governor to infrastructure, and particularly transportation. You're going to see that, and I'm not going to talk about the budget much because we have Shara, and then we're going to go through and talk about projects and that money. So I'm not going to talk about that specifically, but the commitment that the legislature and the governor showed to transportation is just phenomenal. And then secondly, the confidence that they have in UDOT and the commission and all the partners in transportation to create the transportation system that we need. It blows my mind. But that comes through years of working on a good process for choosing good projects, and doing what the transportation system needs us to do. And so that's probably the big, I think, message overall from the session. So we're gonna move right into this. I'm gonna have Peter, my co-pilot, he's gonna present a couple of these bills. And we will move to the first one, which is one of our most favorite and biggest bills of the session. So Peter.
So of the, whatever, it ended up over 200 bills we were tracking during the session, and about 100 of those passed. So I thought I'd do the first 50, and then we've way stripped it down from that. But we'll tell you the few biggies, and if you have any questions now or even later about any bills, we're happy to let you know. This first one is Senate Bill 185, transportation amendments from Senator Harper. That's one of, in my mind, I always think of these as omnibus bills, where a legislator does a bill that covers a lot of things for a department. I think Senator Harper had 2 of those this year, to the point that some people call them Harper bills now up on the Hill. But this one, one of the big things for the commission and for the department and for the governor was that it creates, we didn't think there was enough PIF acronyms. So we got the Active Transportation Investment Fund. And so I forgot to say this bill covers from active transportation to zip lines. So got A to Z in it. But the great thing about this Active Transportation Investment Fund, it creates an ongoing money source that will probably be around $45 million, and then a one-time $45 million to start developing and implementing a statewide paved trail plan. And one of the big things of that is that all those projects will be prioritized by the commission. Another thing that the commission would do is that the State Infrastructure Bank had a new sub-account for certain projects in greenfield areas where there's been no development before. But the legislature forgot to do the important part, which is put some money in that account. So that'll be on hold till it has money. We worked with OLRDC, Leif and I, to kind of fix and modernize a lot of the language in the code about the commission's duties and the deputy director of UDOT's duties and things like that. And so one of them that we clarified is that UDOT will annually update the commission on new capacity projects, which we of course do anyway, but now it's explicit in code. And then one other interesting change we're kind of watching, it's a little unclear how it will work, but one thing in there is that when we're considering local matches for projects, one of the things we can consider is the increased income that will happen to that local government as a result of the project. So presumably maybe some shared tax increment financing or something like that as part of their match. So we'll be watching that to see, see if there's good ways to implement that. I think that's 185. We'll go. The next one is the transportation corridor funding amendments. This is, as you know, we have the Martha Del Rey Corridor Preservation Fund. One is particularly Representative Christopherson, but other legislators are like, well, I don't think we should do more of this buying future corridor preservation. And we said, well, that's great, but we don't have enough people and we don't have any additional money. We're using it to its full capacity. So this bill, along with an appropriation of like $60 million, first of all, allows us to hire one other person with the approval of the commission. And then also to, with hiring another person, instead of waiting for people to call us and say, hey, we have some land, we'd like to sell, do you want it for a future corridor? We're ready to sell. Because we don't do any eminent domain to do this transportation corridor funding. It's willing buyers and willing sellers. But now with extra employee, we might be able to market it a little bit and let people know more about it. It also extended the horizon from 30 to 40 years. So I don't know how that will change things because that's a long way up. But anyway, the commission will have a say in approving all those kind of changes.
Excellent. So the next bill, this one's,
Maybe
oh, yeah.
before we go on from that bill, so I would anticipate that we would have a proposal in front of the commission, probably in the May timeframe for approval for the funding of a position, because that bill will be beginning first week in May, place, when it,
Yeah, May 4th.
and so I think that the May commission meeting will come and ask for that. That'll give Charles the ability to be proactive on those court resolutions. Sorry to interrupt.
No, perfect. Then, and I'll just note that SB3 appropriation, that is ongoing from the Marta Del Rey Fund. I don't know that we'll necessarily need commission approval for that because the legislature already gave that ongoing money. It'd be an additional employee beyond that perhaps, and we can talk about that and figure it out if we need to bring something to the commission. But yeah, it's kind of exciting to be a little more proactive on the corridor preservation front. So, moving on to the next bill. This one's a little more technical in nature, but it does involve the commission. So, I don't know how familiar you guys are with housing and transit reinvestment zones. They're a zone typically around a train station or maybe even a bus rapid transit station. And it allows for encouragement of development, housing and strategic use of transit dollars. And so when they have a proposal that goes actually to GOEO or to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, there's a committee that's formed to consider that proposal. And currently UDOT is one of the members appointed to those committees. Well, the legislature decided to change that. It removes UDOT from membership of the housing from the HTRZ committee and adds a transportation commissioner. It doesn't give any direction about, hey, if the HTRZ is in a particular commissioner's region, then that's the commissioner. I would presume it would be our chair appointing that person. But just to give you just a little bit of flavor, the committee membership currently includes a GOEO member, a city, county, school district, and then the next largest property tax entity, and then also a member of the transit district, transportation commission, state treasurer, and a member from the Senate and the House. So it's a fairly robust committee there to consider those proposals and decide if they want to approve that to move forward. So that's something you'll have to figure out as those come up, where I think just notified that, hey, an HTRZ proposal needs to be considered. I think Terry went to one just the other day, yesterday maybe, and participated because this bill's not into effect until May. So, but that's something the commission will want to consider. The next item, SB 27, this is the second of the two omnibus bills. Just a few things here that concern the commission. This makes technical corrections to the commission related to code sections just to modernize and clarify the language. We found that just some of the language was just old and it was not streamlined compared to other commissions that were in statute. This will not change the functionality of the commission at all. It just repeals obsolete language. I'll just give you an example. It had from 1996 language because the commission changed a little bit that year so that you could stagger the commission membership. And so we removed that language. It had some other language saying that, okay, here's the 6 commissioners and they're going to represent these counties. Well, we have other language in the statute that says there's going to be 2 at large and 1 commissioner for each of the 4 UDOT regions. And so there was just a lot of antiquated language there. I've listed the sections there that are in the bill, it just, if you wanted to go and check it out. But we don't intend that any of that would change what the commission's doing. It's just to modernize the language. The second thing is that they decreased the required local match for TTIP projects from 40% down to 30%.
What's the reason or argument behind that?
So I was not involved in those discussions. It just was in the bill. Yeah, at one time it was 20%. And I know that there were some discussions that, hey, we want the transit district and the local governments to have some skin in the game. And so they felt like taking it down to 20% was too much. So I know there was some discussions and some debate about this. I was not involved in that. I don't know if
This helps
Carrie,
rural, this helps rural. That makes a difference for rural communities.
and yeah, like I say, they were wanting, because TTIP can be used for rural transit agencies as well as in the more rural areas with UTA. So, but
No, it's very much what Donna said. It was meant to try to be able to provide, not all transit districts are the same, not all have the same financial resources. So to be able to make the barrier to entry lower for some of these proposals that we get in. It also, I was in the room when we came up with 40%, and it was very much about wanting to have skin in the game. The compromise here is, well, if it's down to 20% or even the drop to 30%, it's less money available for transit overall, when you think about it from the state. And so this will lower the overall investment in transit, but it could allow transit projects that were not able to come up with the 40% be able to participate. And so that was the back and forth conversation.
Well, this kind of question, that just comes to my world, share about commission. What are the term lengths of commissioners?
You just went through this, didn't you?
That's what I'm asking.
Congratulations on
And with Donna, Donna got
Six-
to turn around
6
what I said
years,
wrong.
sir.
6 years.
See, there's a couple things that were wrong that someone ought to clarify in the committee. It had down that Summit was part of mine, which it's not, and it had 4 years on the term. So I presume that'll be clarified in the final statute. I just noticed that, Donna, that I thought they just trying to say we only want you 4 instead of 6. And
That was part of the staggering pieces that was in there. And then
Okay.
that's, in between, we had language having the regions, the commissioner per region. So it's defined by the UDOT.
Okay, yeah, because I noticed it had 4 years in the language on the agenda for both of us, and it had Summit, which I know is part of Region 2. So anyway, that's just a couple things I noticed. Okay.
excellent. We'll go on to the next one. SB 260. This was an interesting bill. There was a little bit of drama. One of the later bills that were considered and so forth. But ultimately, so if the commission's aware, there are 5 different local option sales taxes for transportation. And this particular one dealt with what we fondly call the fifth. And the reason for that is it was the 5th one. It was the most recent one adopted. So the 5th local option. And then it's also a little unique in that it's a 0.2 instead of 0.25 or 0.3. So they call it the 5th. And one thing that this bill did is that if it's adopted by Davis, Salt Lake, Utah, or Weber County, after 3 years, 25% of the revenue would go to separate to a separate TTIP account and would then be prioritized by the commission for transit projects, transit operations, or transit maintenance in the respective county. I don't know if we'll ever get to the 3 years. There's potential that just because it was adopted so late, I know there were still discussions being had. So I don't know if there'll be more modifications next year. We will see. I see some of the audience smiling, that may be indicating that, yeah, there could be additional conversations. We'll see though. Anyway, so we'll, you don't have to do anything with that just yet, but possibly, we'll see. The next item, HB 301.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this one, to personally, I was really interested in because I was around working for the legislature in the year when they really did kind of thing on the fuel tax rate and kind of bulletproof themselves from future hassles from the public by setting up an automatic system for that to go up over the years and shield them from politically having to run what could be seen as a tax increase year after year. But because of inflation, the fuel tax rate went way up as of January 1st. And there was enough legislators that there was a push for, that Representative Schultz to work with his caucus, thought it was important to do something to ease that increase. So what's going to happen is on July 1, it's going to go down to 34.5 cents. I'm interested to see if the people in Utah go celebrate in the streets when gas goes down 2 cents on July 2nd, but we'll see. And but that's maybe the bad end for if you're with UDOT and you want as much capital as possible. But the good thing is that at least it goes forward and goes to a higher cap than it was going to. So hoping that they don't come back every year and start messing with it, it will lead to a higher amount eventually. Also, to kind of offset, I guess, that lowering of the money we'll get from that, they increased the registration fee by $7 starting next January 1st. And we'll talk later that some of that money is earmarked for rural areas, but I think we got another bill that explains that. And then this is the new thing, is a 12.5% tax on the retail sale of electricity at a charging station for electric vehicles. The idea is that it captures out-of-state users who are coming through Utah and charging. It's still so new that I don't know how much thought went into the exact percentage or what it's going to equal.
Question,
Yeah,
are
go
there
ahead,
other
sure.
taxes charged at electric charging stations, or will this be the only tax that's charged?
Okay, yeah. So I had the same question, and at our confirmation hearing, Donna was accused of asking great questions, and we appreciate those questions.
I just hear the great part.
I think Commissioner Evans verified that they are great questions, and we appreciate them. So I had the same question, and I called up one of the tax commissioners and asked, and she couldn't talk too much. This is Commissioner Rockwell. She couldn't talk too much about it because there's an ongoing suit about whether or not sales tax can be charged. This is different than a sales tax. This is seen as more of an excise type tax, which is what we have on our fuel. Fuel is exempt from sales taxes, so it's not a sales and use tax. It's not on that transaction there. And so there's a possibility that it could be a sales tax plus this tax, depending on how that court case shakes out.
And just this won't apply to if you're a home user, or if you're like an agency or a mall or something that offers it free, that offers it gratis or something for employees or for customers. It's only places where they're charging a retail rate for people to come to the house. Sure.
You do pay a municipal energy tax on your home electricity, but of course that has nothing to do whether or
But
not.
the 12.5%, yeah, it doesn't.
So HB 54, this is the big tax bill that the legislature passed. I have this first bullet point, what we might care about. That's that it removes the sales tax on food, and that's contingent upon the adoption of a constitutional amendment that removes the income tax earmark for education and whatever else it's earmarked for. And that piece of the bill will be put to a vote of the people at the next general election. That'll be in 2024. And that would impact the TIF revenues. That's probably somewhere in the range of $45-55 million ongoing, something like that. That's what the fiscal note indicated. And it's just something to be aware of. The tax issue is a little bit bigger than just transportation. It's an interesting issue. We'll have to see how that shakes out. Some of the other provisions, in case you're interested, it reduced the income tax rate from 4.85 to 4.65. There's also an additional tax credit for the birth of a child. It also expands the Social Security tax credit for singles. It extends the threshold at which the tax credit begins to decrease by $6,500, and for a joint return, it would be extends that threshold by $13,000. It also increases the state earned income tax credit, which is based on the federal credit. So the state credit goes to 20% of the federal earned income tax credit, up from 15%. So I think this is our last one on here. SB 175, Rural Transportation Infrastructure Fund. This is another addition to the TIF family. This is the Rural Transportation Investment Fund, or the RTIF. And the commission, this does not impact the commission, but I thought you might be interested in this bill, which is why we raised the issue. So the money in the fund is distributed to counties of the 3rd through 6th class. And so for those who haven't followed the population, for those that's between 0 and 175,000 population. So the smallest 2nd class county is Washington County. They're about 193,000 or so. So they'd be the first county not in that 3rd class designation. But the money that is distributed is similar to Class B and C road funds. You use it for the same purposes. And the money that's put into that fund is $40 million one-time general fund. So just in 2024, a one-time infusion of $40 million. And then, as Peter said, $2 of that $7 registration increase will go to fund the RTIF. And that's about $7.5 million annually in today's dollars.
So like, was there a requirement that the county had to pass at least one of the transportation taxes?
Yeah.
Is that correct also?
That's correct. I don't have that up on the screen, but it does come with the encouragement to adopt one of those local option transportation sales taxes, one of the 5. And actually, I think it's.
Does it have to be countywide, or, I mean, could it start at the county?
Yeah.
It had to be countywide.
Countywide.
Okay.
So, and just to give you kind of, this is a big deal for locals, as you guys would know. And just to kind of explain that a little bit, currently, or the most recent year, the total amount of money that went to 3rd through 6th class counties and cities that are within those counties was about $100 million. So you can see $40 million, that's a one-time increase of 40% of their B and C road funds. And then an ongoing increase of 7 to 8%. And so that's a huge deal for these local groups. So, yeah.
Would you please go back to the previous chart or the screen? Explain to me impact to TIF revenue based on the HB 54.
Sure. So right now, one of the revenue streams going into the TIF is it's 20.68% of the sales tax raised by our state rate, and that includes taxes raised by on food. And so that 20.68% has a smaller revenue, would have a smaller amount of revenue that it would be up against to put money into the TIF. So.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Check.
Gene.
Any questions on any other legislation?
I have one. You added more responsibility to the UDOT commission, but no pay raise. What about that?
We will, look for that very hard next year.
We do it for the love.
Yeah. Doing more with less as they.
Oh, I forget, we're gonna get lunch today. I forgot.
You get some lunch.
Two things maybe before we go on to Sheriff. Take the next piece, right? One, changing the organization. Josh Ventura, come on, sit at the table, part of the new leadership team, we can't hide. So. Just like the commission, when you do good work, you get more stuff to do and no increase. But Josh will be leading the group. We'll have our transit division, which was one of the things we were successful in getting funding for, as well as the active transportation piece. We wanted to get that position filled as quick as possible, even though we're before the start of the new fiscal year. Money will be available for most of those people, but we needed him to start to figure out actually how to do what we promised to do. Because that figuring it out is the second piece of actually delivering it. So really happy for Josh here. Excited for him. He's been doing a great job on Cottonwood Canyon work. And oh, by the way, he doesn't get to leave that either. Well, when you look at the Cottonwood Canyon EIS, all the alternatives are transit. So that development of the transit alternative will be part of his responsibility. And second thing, kind of a big day today, birthday. UDOT's birthday. How old do you think we are?
I don't know, but I would have brought cake.
114 years.
That's awesome.
Today's the day we recognize that creation of what was at the time the State Road Commission. That's what it started off. We've had multiple names. Department of Highways, Department of Engineering. And then we became the Utah Department of Transportation. I think it was in the mid-70s.
Happy birthday.
Everyone, all of us.
You don't look for old, 114 years old, though.
Between you and I, we could probably get there. Got us together, we're there. Time for me to stop talking, Eric, Sheriff.
She's like, how do I follow that?
Okay, so as far as the budget presentation, we'll focus on the funds that commission approves and prioritizes. So we have both our ongoing funds that UDOT manages and then the one-time funding we receive through this legislative session. So our ongoing funding, this pie chart shows we're just a hair over $2 billion of ongoing funding. The largest proportion, 49%, is within our Transportation Investment Fund, which we call the TIF. We have our next biggest portion is in the Transportation Fund, nearly 24%, and then 21% in federal funding. The last 7% is made up of 5 smaller funds: the TIFs, the T-TIFs, the A-TIF, the CC-TIF, Rural Transit, and Aeronautics. On the next slide, we show our one-time funding. So this session was generous to us. We received $1.3 billion of one-time funding, split between these 6 funds. So the largest proportion again went to the TIF. We've received some in Transportation Fund, T-TIF, CC-TIF, the new A-TIF, and Aeronautics. Aeronautics is too small to really see on that pie chart. Sorry. So we'll look specifically at the Transportation Fund. That's that 24% of that ongoing funding pie that we looked at. And as everyone's probably aware, the Transportation Fund is for the day-to-day operations, maintenance, and preservation activities of the department. So if we're looking at revenue, so we're anticipating, well, we're anticipating about $818 million in revenue in the transportation fund, but I will caveat that that's before those changes in HB 301, the gas tax decrease, the registration increase. So we've run some projections, but it's been hard to narrow down. So we're waiting a little bit until next month when the new consensus revenue comes out to kind of narrow us in a little bit more. But we'll be managing the funding within this based on how that bill impacts the revenue. But as you can see, gas tax is the largest source of revenue, 82% into the transportation fund, followed by registration fees, permits, and other use tax fees. As far as expenditures, you can see that about 41% of the funding within the transportation fund goes back out of the transportation fund into other funds and other entities and agencies, B&C roads. Of the funding we keep, the largest proportion is spent on operation and maintenance, followed by highway systems construction, and then we have our region management support services and engineering services. Of the one-time funds, for transportation fund, we received a very not round number of 124,992,800,000 or 800, excuse me. And Terry, are you gonna talk about what that goes towards?
Yes. Okay, so the next slides, we tried to, it seems like it gets more complicated every year to try to explain what happens. But the way we're trying to break it out is projects that were legislated, and the commission's role when a project is legislated varies depending on how the legislation was written. If the legislation contains the scope and the funding level, we bring it to you for information. If it threw a couple of projects into a funding amount, then we bring it to you for approval so that you can decide how much each project within that amount of money gets. So we're gonna try to keep it really clear for you, but it is a little complicated. And I will say that we have a lot of slides here today with the idea that you can go back to them at any time. We're gonna post them. Ivan, did you tell me that you're getting Heather to post, or Christine is posting today? So you can go back to this slide deck and try to review, and hopefully we put it in an order.
And it was built in a way that it followed the breadcrumbs from the as best as possible from legislation to what actually the commission uses.
Yeah, because I think sometimes it's hard for you to know what was legislated versus what you were asked to program. And so we try to keep that really clear for you in the presentation and make it so you can go back and refer. So that being said, this was going into the transportation fund, 4 items that each had very specific amounts to them. So there's not an approval for the commission here. This is for your information because you hear about these projects and think, what is your role in these? So these projects are legislated and will not come back to you for approvals. Any question? I guess every once in a while we should check to see if online Commissioner Van Tassel has a question, but.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, you may have to kind of shout and interrupt us on occasion if we don't remember to ask every 15 minutes or so.
Sorry, the Southern Parkway interchange, that is a project that has been on the STIP that the commission has approved, but this is additional money to that existing project previously.
I'll look to Lisa to nod yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted the commission to realize that of these 4 projects, that one's a little different because it is already a project out there. It went out to bid. The bids came in higher. And so the locals work through the legislative process.
Yeah, and you see also that these are designated as pass-throughs, so we're not managing the projects. Cheryl will just make the transaction, and then we may have a role in terms of coordinating with those that are running the projects, but we won't be managing them ourselves. Okay, here's one for 88.5 million, and this is where we're creating some breadcrumbs for you because the final language it said to implement the provisions of the oil and gas severance tax amendments. which did not have further clarification on what it was. As things evolved, we were aware of what the desire for the money to go to was. So the trail of breadcrumbs we've given you, we've clipped out part of the, Leif, help me, RFA
Yeah,
is
the
what?
request for
Okay,
appropriation.
thank you, sorry. So this is clipped out of the RFA that was not approved. But this is our understanding. You can see that it was 88.5 million in funding for the new severance tax. And it is basically for Highway 191, or what we would call US 191 safety improvements. And you've done some asking clarifying questions.
Yeah, we've communicated with the governor's office and also with the legislative fiscal analyst, just to be sure that we want to get this intent right. That's our whole objective, is to spend the money how they want us to, and just to make sure if we were to get audited down the road that, hey, we did our due diligence to make sure we spent this the way the legislature wanted us to.
And miraculously, this matches the number of the study we did for safety improvements for US 191. Rob, true?
And this is for the energy corridor, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this had many variations throughout the session.
So the next slide is just kind of the wrap up, putting it into what we would call it. It was listed Highway 191. We'd call it US 191. Safety improvements, our intent would be to do that project at 88.5 million.
So bringing that to the commission.
Yes, because the scope isn't exactly clear. So we bring it to the commission so that it gets clearly programmed. So that's why I said nothing is completely clean. So we're just trying to leave you the trail of breadcrumbs. Okay, the next one, it also goes through the transportation fund. It was 20 million to match federal discretionary grant funds for wildlife mitigation projects. So 20 million there.
Is this for fencing, underpasses, overpasses?
So it was a lot for fencing and some grade separations, like you said, Kevin. But again, we can't access this money unless we're successful in getting a federal grant.
Right, okay.
And since our grants person isn't here, have we
They
applied?
haven't even.
They haven't put the grants out yet.
NOFO hasn't gone out. And I think this was primarily, the discussion was around 84 and 80.
Yeah, I think there's some language up in there. We didn't circle it, but projects, prioritize mitigation projects at the junction of I-84 and I-80. Okay, next. So Lisa, we let Lisa do all the check boxes.
What do? You just blink your eyes and
It's a
check
little
what's
thing.
there?
Yeah. We're an agency that likes to see progress.
That's fair.
Okay, federal funding, I guess it'd be Shara Ivan.
Yes. The next person is the federal funding, which is the gray piece of our ongoing $2 billion pie. I could go into that.
So one thing we wanted to highlight, some of the changes from the IIJA. Historically, we've had 5 core funds that we received funding from the federal highways. And of those, majority of it was flexible. So there was a lot of discretion among programming values into programs, and then always the flexibility to program the projects within those programs. As the new formula funds came from IIJA, it became fairly specific. Here's the types of projects that we need to do with these funds. So as we received guidance later in the year, last year, this year, you'll see that there's more programs, but these programs are specific to these federal fund codes. So of this, showing the graphic, this is the breakdown of the types of federal money that we receive. And of those types in blue, those are directed fairly specifically on the types of projects that we have. So as you can see, the growth really was growth specific. This is a graphic we've seen in the past where we can look at the different types of funding, starting from the left, the different types of funds that we receive. The 19.8 million of transportation investment fund, that's a takedown for preservation projects. The 150 million that Sharon talked about a minute ago with the highway systems construction line item, and then our highway federal funds of 526 million. After we take those different types, we have a total of 696 million. But of that, we take and pass through and reprogram the money a little bit. 108.3 million are pass through from the federal, and then we shift 30.6 million of our highway systems construction and move it into the federal category because that's the local match. That's our match, the state match on our highway federal funds.
Ivan, if you can't see all the numbers up there, if somebody wanted to go online and see this, do we have the link in the slide deck, or would they just, can you tell them where they go to find this?
You can. It's on the UDOT transportation. You can just navigate and share this page. And it's being updated right now. So under our UDOT homepage, scrolling down like we do every month to our Transportation Commission page. We scroll down, you can see the presentation that we're actually reviewing right now has been listed. This is our March programming workshop. That's a PDF version of the presentation that we're looking at. And under that, we have these supporting links for the processes, programs, and projects. The processes was that the intent, the calendar is listed here. And this programs link, if you take that program link, this would launch into this slide deck that we're talking about. Okay. And this becomes a little easier to see than on the slides.
Thank you.
Okay. So now that we're at the point where we've organized the funding into the different fund types that we have to work with, we have a required section of federal funding that we're going to be, there's less discretion to move between programs. Then we'll talk about the program summaries and the proposal of the different funding amount in those programs. And this is our next check. Okay.
All right, commissioners, we're gonna go in a program overview. So remember that number that Ivan showed you? It was 588 million that's left to program and different things. That will be a number that we're talking about that'll be down here in this bottom, this 587.6, that same number, okay, that he showed just down there. What we're going to try and help you see today is just from past years where we've been. So first of all, this is that list that you saw that Ivan showed of the different programs. Some of these have required amounts of money in them. They're marked with an asterisk. So there's specific money set aside from the Fed that is required in this particular area. Others are at your discretion and recommendation to fund based on the recommendations we give you. The way we'll do this is just to remind you, these numbers that are in black are the numbers that you funded last year. So they were the numbers you approved to be funded, the ones that are in black. In certain categories, you funded not only the 2023 fiscal year, but you also funded money in the 24 and 25 years for project purposes in order for us to be able to design and get to construction within a period of time. You fund money out 3 years in certain cases. So if they're in gray or blue, they were previously funded and they have black numbers. You'll see all the numbers that are in the white color show up in the end as to what our recommendations are. And then those that are white boxes are just projections of what the likely scenarios would be for funding if nothing changes. We'll go over each of these sections. The sections we're going to go over will be covered in green, like I've demonstrated here, and we'll just work our way to the bottom. Okay. The objective today is to give you confidence that the money we're asking you to program will in fact maintain our assets and the infrastructure for the state at a level that is not only sufficient, but oftentimes even better than it exists today. If there's available money to improve, we seek to do that. If there's not, we'll try to identify the base or core amount of money we'd recommend you put in certain assets in order for us to maintain the system that we have. In doing so, we often go to the strategic direction. Troy brings this up every month to the commission when he talks about certain areas related to our fatalities and injuries and mobility. We talk about this infrastructure one once a year, because that's what we do throughout the year as we analyze how is the infrastructure performing, how did the investment that we applied and the projects that were chosen and recommended each month, how did they all play out in terms of meeting the targets and objectives we sought to achieve. And that's what we look at when we go to the infrastructure section of our strategic performance measure. It covers 4 areas. It covers our intelligent transportation systems. Think about that as all the electronics within the system besides the signal. All right, that's probably the easiest way to think about it. If it's ramp meters, all of the different things that are there besides signals, that's what this category is. And then of course we have signals over here on the other side. And then our 2 largest assets, the bridges and pavements, carrying this area. We used to track this data by whether or not they met the targets we had set. And with infrastructure where it's measured once a year and we looked about whether or not we met the targets that we were set, you'll remember that we were holding well in terms of the target. And it perhaps didn't help understand some of the areas where assets were having some challenges, where things weren't maybe quite as great as we'd hoped they were. We needed to adjust that target. So in 2019, we changed it. And instead of saying, does the overall index meet the target, we said, does it meet 100% good category? That all of these various assets are in good shape and they need no attention other than what's currently being provided. And so you can see it changed the benchmark a little bit, but it's more reflective for the conversation we're having with an annual review about how those are performing. So we're going to show you what that looks like in terms of each of those categories. So we'll break pavement up. First of all, we'll break it up in 2 areas about what we call the high volume and the low volume, right? These categories were designated and separated around 2012. And you will recall that around 2015, a gas tax was passed, and it was specifically to help that low volume category because we were trying to maintain the high volume. The goals we have in this particular area in this category is about ride. Now, ride for us is based on how rough the surface is. Okay, and so it's only one indicator of whether a pavement's good or a bridge is good or other things that are there, but it's a good indicator for consistency in reporting about how our system seems to be functioning. And so that's what we've been reporting on for nearly 20 years, and it's been a good positive indicator. What we try to do in the high volume is to keep those areas that would be what we call the poor ride, less than 5%. And we try to keep those that are a good ride. You can see the target is 65%. That target used to be 60. It was changed a few years ago to be more accountable for how we were measuring some items. But in general terms, those that are the dark color, that means that that's actual data and how it's performed. Those that are the light color and all of these are projections about if you continue to fund in the way that we've requested, what likely will happen to the system, okay? And you can see that if you look at this particular area for high volume, we're performing reasonably well. Low volume, as we mentioned, 2015, gas tax was passed, $40 million specifically per year was infused into this part of the roadway system. And you can see that as those projects came online by 2017, what that's done for that system. You can see that that system is moving back a lot closer to the targets that we're looking at and where we want to be as far as measuring and expectations. And so that program seems to be doing what it was intended to do. The revenues associated with it seem to be meeting the needs that are there. As far as does it ride sufficient? Okay. Now, when we talk about whether or not the pavement's going to last and some of those things, there's another question about besides just how does it ride? And so the federal government has a measure that they use for pavements, for bridges, for safety. They have these measures they use. And in these particular assets, they call it the overall condition index. So you can see whether it's in the bottom left over here for asphalt or at the top right over here for concrete, that ride is one of those measures that we just looked at. They also have these other measures for concrete about the faulting and the cracking. You may recall out on I-80 headed from the Salt Lake Valley towards the canyon at Park City that pavement seemed to last forever, but these particular faulting areas were well known because it shook you to death riding in that area. So when you think about the overall condition, the experience of there was something more there than just the ride, there was also an issue with the concrete that over time we needed to address. The same thing you can find then over here in asphalt is when they're rutting and when they're cracking, it changes them. Now, what I want to point out to you about why I brought this today is that we were having some challenges related to what we called sleeping giants or pavements like that one I described on I-80 that really needed attention, but they weren't going to be eligible for a TIP project because there wasn't a need for a capacity change or some of those other items that were there so much, but they needed to be able to be maintained to better help our system. And so because of those, you passed a program starting in 2016, you started funding money that we started using by 2018 and 19 to address what we call those large reconstruction rehab projects. And you started putting 50 million a year in that. What I want you to be able to see is that even though we saw a ride before about the whole system, this side over here is our interstates, and this is our non-interstates that are on the national highway system, again, because it's for federal reporting. That's why we're showing these. And you can see specifically what happened as we started to infuse that money to address this poor area, which is a whole lot less than the money that we infuse into the overall pavement and bridge, because we believe good roads cost less. We should put the majority of our money to maintain that area in the green. But you can see that we also need to make sure that we don't hit these targets that existed at this particular area. And so that infusion of money has made a difference. Okay, we want you to see here in terms of pavement, it's made a difference, and you can see the difference that it's making in just what's there. So we'll move to bridge. We talked about bridge last year in a similar way and looked at that. And bridge has some complex measures and ways that they measure it. And if you think of it in terms of the feds, they try to simplify it into three areas. They say there's a substructure, there's a superstructure, and there's a deck. And when they measure those three areas, they'll say, well, if any one of those areas then is in a failing condition or a average condition, it'll shift criteria. And so what we're looking at here is how that criteria works. And last year we showed you green, yellow, and red. Okay, and we showed you what that was. And the question was, well, it seems like those that are in good condition are falling at a pretty rapid rate. What are we going to do about that? I'll show you in a second. One of the things we did was we changed the reconstruction program. A second thing that happened is the IIJA bill brought on the formula program for bridges. And both of those things will have an effect on this. But in some ways, this year, what we wanted to bring to your attention is how much of this area in yellow is actually going towards red. And so Carmen and Cheryl's team has went through and analyzed all the data at a little bit further level, if you will, one level deeper, to be able to show you the portion of those that are moving from the good to fair category that are getting close to going into the poor category. So before, when you look at that, you're like, wow, we've got a lot of bridges moving into Fair. Does that mean that we'll see the same increase in poor as we're seeing in Fair? And you can see from the data, it's not quite as dramatic maybe that going to poor as it is in good. And there's a number of reasons why in the measurements. So we wanted to bring that to your attention to understand that this program here, the Bridge Formula Program, will really help a portion of that. A couple of things to point out in that program. There are 23 on-system bridges that were identified to repair, 55 off-system bridges that were identified to repair, and 12 that are state-owned. And then you can see in the regions how that number breaks down. Of those bridges that are there, we have 68 in planning, 15 in design, 1 in construction. So this program is going to make a huge difference, as you can see across the map, in a number of areas about moving that needle that we talked about in orange. There's a couple of them in red. And then down here, you can see that the structures group has a number of different things they're looking at. Some of those bridges have issue with scour or washing away in that substructure, right, that's there. Some of those bridges have issues with loading. It might be posted that they have a limitation on usage, and that affects our transportation system. And then you can see in this particular case, the bridges that also are in poor condition that have load. So our structures division has put a ton of time into the available money that came through the IIJA fund, the $45 million a year that's programmed to help look at those projects that are eligible, where would they be and how to do it. They met with the locals for about a year's worth of effort, Carmen, working out what those priorities were to get this program where it is today. So that's going to help that bridge piece. Okay, here's the other thing that will help that bridge piece. I mentioned that we had this reconstruction program that we started programming back in 2016. By 2019, you saw money being spent in that. It was being spent at $50 million a year. Okay, this was all being spent on pavement, and if there were bridge areas that needed rehab or preservation, the existing bridge funds were brought to the project to help do that. Starting last year, the commission worked with us to make a change in this prioritization, that not only would we use this selection criteria for pavements, and not only would we pay for portions of bridge that met that criteria when a pavement was selected, but standalone bridges that met these criteria could also be in there. So you can see now with the money that was programmed, what the allocation of the 70 million and then 75 and then 77 million that you'll see showing up on our funding tab, you'll see what the distribution of that is then for both pavements and bridge. And hopefully this will give you some confidence that in our 2 largest assets, we feel these funding infusions that are there will allow us to maintain and achieve the level of asset protection, as well as the desired performance that we want in those systems. One thing that we ought to bring then to our attention in looking at all this, thank you, Carmen, for putting together this construction cost index for everyone to look at what's been going on over the period of time with construction. The big question is, what will we see for the future? And so Carmen's been able to help us identify that based on bid prices and the cost index that's moving along here, if you interpret that then to be what does this look like in terms of potential increases in our costs, we can be anywhere from 6 to 11% in the short term and 4 to 8% in a little bit longer term, and cost increases that come with our construction projects. So just kind of think about that and pay attention to that number.
I think that's a really important point to then tie that graph back to the projected conditions. So remember the histograms where you had the dark, what's in dark were actual measurements, and then the lighter color were based on modeling. That modeling projections were based on an assumption of how much work we can get done for a certain dollar value. And so that variability there plays a big part. So if we have $100 million going to pavements and inflation is at 12% instead of 5%, which we had done historically, we're gonna get a lot less work done, so the condition will be not as good. The outcomes will not get as good. I think that's an important point, that we're trying to manage that future cost increases.
Thanks, Carlos. Are there other questions about pavement and bridge? We've covered most of the material. We wanted to give you an overall view about how we think they're performing, but do you have any other questions, commissioners, others, about pavement and bridge? We'd be happy to answer them.
Could you please explain to commission what roads are good to use asphalt on them? What roads are good to use concrete or the combination thereof? Conditions or the climate region?
I would love to phone a friend sitting right next to me that oversees all of our choices in that way and let her give you a good answer.
I wish Bill was here because I'm not the pavement person, but in general, when we're looking at the type of facility, whether it's asphalt or concrete, a lot of times we like to have, we're basically looking at the service life of the pavement. So concrete, we're really looking to get like 40 years out of that type of pavement. Asphalt is more along the lines of that 15 to 20 without having to go back in and do some preservation work. Interstates is one example of where we would like to use concrete because of, trying to get that 40-year service life. So when we're looking at each project, we take that into consideration.
Thanks, Carmen.
Climate doesn't have any factor in it, like cold, hot, like St. George, hot temperature, and you have -0 sometimes.
Not necessarily.
No, I mean, every pavement, they're projecting how many easels, equivalent single axle loads. So basically, think of a truck. Every axle of a truck has those wheels. Those are creating impacts on the pavements. And so they project the number of trucks, then they convert that to easels. And so now we have this idea of how many loads that pavement's going to take, and we analyze it over a 20-year, 40-year horizon. And it's a cost-benefit analysis. And so the more trucks you have, the more loading you have, and also the more areas of more traffic. We want to be able to not have to get into the traffic as often to do preservation work that they'll have to do with asphalt so often. And so it's based on that benefit cost analysis that they do. To do that.
My question was relative to bridges. Can you go back to that structures?
Can you go back to the structures tab?
Yeah, that infographic,
This one? Yeah.
this one. The average age of bridges is 62 years. That's the average age of the bridges in our current system. And what's the average age supposed to be? I mean, that's my age and I'm falling apart, so.
So Cheryl, if I'm speaking correctly, let me know, but I believe this is the average here of the bridges within this program. Correct. Right, and this is a kind of a dashboard that how we're tracking it, and you'll be able, we could put the link in the presentation as well. It's on our website. So as we go through this program through the years, you'll see all of these numbers being updated.
Carmen, that list for the bridge program is the one we brought to the commission a
Yes.
year ago, the long list,
Right.
and said each year we'll bring back a smaller list where we actually program the money to them. So it's probably our worst bridges.
Yeah, within this program, yes. And there's several pages within this dashboard, and you can always go there to reference that list as well.
So I think Commissioner Law, you bring up a really good point. The reason this program exists is a lot related to that point. One of the things that affects condition is definitely age. And because of that, there's a large portion of bridges in this category, kind of like we talked about the high and low volume pavements, and we had to look at gas tax to affect those. Across the country, it was identified that there's a portion of bridges that meet the criteria here and needed more attention than the way funding often worked out if you're looking at the most users, the highest volume, that type of thing. And so this program was the 45 million a year set aside to address that. Roughly 255 million, I think it is, it's in this program. And these were the bridges that were identified that we could start to drive that number down with if these projects happen.
And if you remember, this program is unique in that we can use it. You see the term down below, local on system and local off system. And so there was a lot of flexibility in this program to help those off-system bridges. These are mostly local bridges that locals have a really hard time getting to. And so we came to the commission a year ago, we're like, it was a commission discretion. We could have said, let's spend the money on, state bridges. This is where we needed to apply attention.
So on the 40 versus 20 average or 15 on the roads, I know that this is a commissioner's times when the road fails, quick sooner or should. Is that primarily due to the substructure underneath that did things we didn't know was going to happen? Maybe every now for workmanship. I'm just wondering what generally causes it to fail sooner than we know. Is there
I'm going to look to see, Robert, you were a materials guy. Do you want to answer this? Each side. So there's a lot.
A current example that we have is up in Summit County, right, in the Kimball Junction area. We were just in paving that, right? This year, we've had a high record snowfall, right? And it's changed the underlying moisture patterns that we've seen in the area. Moisture is one of those things that's very bad for pavement, right? So when we go in and do like what we call a seal coat, we're just trying to seal up the cracks to prevent moisture from getting in, to prevent really, really fine material from coming up into the structure of the pavement. So generally, when you see pavement deteriorating faster than we thought, increased traffic loading could be that case, or something with the substructure like moisture that we didn't anticipate happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just wondering if
Yeah, the most important thing in pavement design is water. Get the water out of things.
Thank you.
So, and I think to Commissioner Zanotti, your question then, when you're thinking about those pavements that are there, which is where I started my career with the department, if it's heavy trucks and a large volume of traffic, we would always lean in the direction of concrete because it would have less frequent need to be in there and affect the traffic, and it can affect those loads that are just repeated over and over and over. The thing that changes that, as we mentioned, is moisture and soil conditions. That's one of the things that changes it. Another thing that's changed in the last decade is what we call performance graded asphalts. It used to be that those heavy loads caused a lot of rutting. You may remember when you drive a lot of roads and it would just pull you right into the rut when you ride.
It had the hydroplaning problem.
And those caused a number of issues for us, but the type of asphalt that they have today has been able to almost eliminate that for the most extent. And so that's given more flexibility about where we maybe see asphalt today than we saw concrete in the past, because there was reasons to be concrete there, but now we can look at that soil and look at that traffic and a few of those other things. And sometimes we can use an asphalt in the area that's not there. Another thing that affects that as far as the department goes for making that decision is availability to repair. So there's some places where you might not be able to get the concrete repair materials you need or the asphalt repair materials you need, and that might also go into a selection of how you would choose. So number of factors that are in there. As we kind of mentioned, we've got a team of hundreds of individuals that are working in our assets and looking at those items to drive and make those decisions. And hopefully, as you look at what we've had here, as we stated our objective before, is you have confidence that what we're suggesting you fund will meet those needs.
Donna, maybe Carmen can cringe when I say this, but we used to design our bridges for 45 years to 50 years. Now we're looking more at 75 years. That doesn't mean we don't touch those bridges during that period of time doing preservation and repair work. But that's the typical design life we're trying to get out of the bridges now.
That's great. That's a nice piece of
And they do show, when the asset management teams get together and they're trying to make the technical analysis, we have a very good idea of the ages of our bridges. We're sort of beneficiaries that we're a younger state. We don't have very big bridges compared to a lot of states. But we're seeing that effect of our bridges are getting, and that is going to be a continual challenge for us.
Lonnie, you were designed for 100 years, I heard. So
I hope that's the case. I just need some resurfacing. I did that to myself.
Donna, you're awesome. Thanks, Commissioner Blau. All right, so we've often heard the term an ounce of prevention helps with a pound of cure. We've also identified that in certain instances, we do have to cure things. So this reconstruction program, again, it grew from the 50 to the 70 and 75 and includes a large portion of bridge now. But when we look at the totals overall, you'll see that 50 million that was there to 70 million this year and moving forward, you'll see that number is small in comparison to our prevention numbers, okay? If you thought about it this way, these are these two pavement areas we talked about in terms of prevention. And this is also our structures without that 45 million for that bridge formula program. You can add that to this as well. So we feel like we have the right mix. We're looking at those overall dollars, that 588 that Ivan talked about, that should be available for FY24. And we're saying based on these conditions we have, the dollars that are available, how should we expend the money? One of our recommendations then was to go back and look at the amount of money that's actually coming into highway systems construction, what we think that amount of money could be this year and moving into these other years of the program. And we believe that there's about a 3% increase that will happen over these years in that program amount. So our recommendation has been is to essentially take looking at the inflation and everything we said that could be at 4 to 8 for projects and everything else, is that we go ahead and we increase every one of these categories by 3%. Okay, so you'll see in our recommendation, moving high volume to 167 and pavement to 36 and construction to 77 for the reconstruct and structures to 86. That's a 3% increase in all of those asset areas that we're going to be recommended. It may not be quite at the level overall that could happen to us in the inflation, but based on the funds we have available and a couple of these other things that we need to talk about need consideration, that's going to be our recommendation. It gets us close to where we are and allows us to continue to maintain the system at a level we think is appropriate.
And Nate, we haven't done that before.
We have not done that.
We haven't suggested inflation increases in those items. We've kind of left them flat, and if we saw a problem, we bump the number.
We will deal with it in project level, coming back to the commission saying we need more money for this project.
So this is kind of, we haven't really done like just that small increase per year, but that's kind of a new practice potentially.
Yeah, the first time we saw increases applied like this a couple of years ago was with IIJA, because the way the bill was structured, it actually increased each year. And so there's been some federal allocation that's in there, as well as trying to look at the overall highway systems construction brings this opportunity. So what we want to jump into now are these three areas right here.
Wait, can I ask a
question? Sure.
Sorry. Well, so structures, if I'm reading this correctly, does not include the bridge formula. So then we've got the bridge formula on top of that.
Right. So there's this 86 plus 45.
So
and there's, each of these years, there's 45 million.
with the bridge formula funding, would we have the opportunity to reduce that and apply it to some other places for a time, or is that just not something I'm just talking, it's a pocket thing, right?
You could, but if you recall the area I showed in looking at both pavements and structures and how they're performing and where we needed to expend funds, both in the cure area as well as the preservation.
So we need this plus the
I
bridge
think we
formula
need-
to accomplish all.
Which one was most important to that local system? We're not showing those measurements, we're showing the state system.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
So
Thank you.
we
Sorry.
need them both, and we're applying money to bridge in a number of different areas to try and help balance that equation. But we think we need all of those to happen. And yes, the decision you made about where to put the 45 million a year does affect the state bridges, because you saw so many of them that are off system. In fact, that slide showed that only 13 or something are state bridges of that whole list. So we still have a significant amount of bridges that we need to maintain to address those curves that you were looking at.
I lose track of what money can be spent where.
It's just two different systems, so thank you where the funding comes from.
Nathan, why 3%? Where did you get that calculation of it? What calculator you used?
I'll go ahead and let Ivan and Shara answer that, how to get that calculation.
It was tough. It's not as much as the bridge people and the pavement people would like. I'll tell you that, but it's just like everything in life, right? You basically deal with the money you're getting.
Well, I'm just saying that, why not 5%? or
Okay, that's a
2%?
great question. I could answer that one for you from this slide. So if the money coming in is what it is up here, which they think from the best projections and looking at everything that's happened, this is the money coming in. When you fund that whole entire list, you end up with a remaining amount, and we put that remaining amount in transportation solutions, okay? And so this is that remaining amount. So if you choose, and this is what the commissioners need to look at and understand, if you choose to put more money in these programs, this will continue to drop, okay? So think about all of those projects we do in transportation solutions that don't fit exactly one of these asset categories, but have that benefit, that it changes that remaining amount. Okay, so you can see this year, we think that amount will be about 61.8. And as these continue to increase and we apply that full percentage of increase here, that continues to go down. So we're trying to do a delicate balance here between all priorities, all the way from transportation solution type projects to assets, to get the balance that's there. And that's how our recommendations established. And the reason we put these two numbers on here was just to kind of show you where it starts and what it ends up.
And I think Carlos's point about it being kind of a compromise recommendation was because the asset manager said, you just showed us inflation is going up by this much, but we were trying to balance out a recommendation to keep some money into transportation solutions. And maybe one more thing to point out is Shara is trying to help figure out what we think the money comes in at, and we are going to slightly over program is our suggestion, so that we will have projects queued up and ready, and then Shara will be constantly keeping an eye on it and telling us how much money actually comes in. We may have to hold a project that gets programmed, but if we don't program it, we won't have it ready to go if the money actually comes in like we think it might.
So some of the most important intent language we get every year is because we are a self-contained fund, we have an appropriation. They make a guess. Now, we can't spend.
Projection.
A projection, a good projection.
Out of fairness.
Very sophisticated. Now, since we're self-contained, that doesn't mean we can spend that amount. But we can only spend what comes in. And so that's part of our job with the tax commission, with Shara's office, with Ivan's office, is making sure, yes, let's program it. Let's base it on the sophisticated projections. But if it doesn't come in, we can't spend it because there's nowhere else for that money to come from. And so then we hold projects based on what the revenues are actually coming in. Now, plus side of that is if more comes in than was appropriated, we also have the authority to spend that money, because otherwise it would just sit in the transportation fund unappropriated and it would not go to use. So we always say that let's put the money to use as fast as possible. If a project's worth doing, let's deliver it as fast as
So that's an example of what happened here.
So by using that 3%, projected 3% increase, then eventually you're gonna have TSP is gonna go to zero?
It's going down. It's going down.
Well, it could. We've been looking at models of what it takes to maintain all of our different assets and different levels and how much risk they're at, to try and balance everything from here, say from keeping this at 50 million to running it down to 20 million or even into the negative.
And it's just, let's recognize, it's gonna cost us more to maintain those assets in the future. We're getting older, we're growing as a state, there's gonna be more traffic. And so it's gonna cost more.
As infrastructure ages, that's definitely something we have to think about, which is why we've encouraged and asked for multiple years so much money on the preservation side, kind of like Robert said, you know, we're trying to seal the moisture out. We're trying to seal up the bridge decks so that we don't start getting potholes. All those things just really, really matter long term. And that's what we've seen our state be able to perform well, maybe in comparison to nationally, is that effort up front in that preservation area. And so that's an important program for us to continue to maintain.
One other area we can maintain out of, we have, is it authorization or authority, or what's the right word, to do some maintenance out of TIF. So if we built the road out of TIF, we can maintain it out of TIF.
Operate.
So we do have some ability to shift some small amounts of money to be able to take care of some of those big pavements, big bridges out of TIF. So that's.
That was one of the things I credit Linda and Becky, a former speaker, Lockhart. She put that one sentence in the law so that we were, you know, if you listen to legislation, when DFCM is building buildings, they have to set aside a percentage for maintenance. That was the effort to say, if you're building more stuff, we need to make sure that we maintain that stuff. But it's a relatively, when you think about the TIF projects, it's a relatively small percentage of the state system.
Okay, we'll now talk about these last two areas here about the traffic and safety and traffic management. You'll actually see that we're requesting about 5 million in this area and 10 million in this area. So we saved these separate from this discussion to have these because these are significant increases and we need to discuss why.
Can I come back to Transportation Solution Fund? I think sometimes that fund has been used to deal with smaller projects, as I understand, where there's a need, and so maybe smaller areas of the state where you just have a need that arises, and so that funding is there. I just want to say I have some concerns about that. I know we're working with great big large projects and large infrastructure, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the importance of the smaller roads and smaller parts of the state where there are things that need attention. And sometimes I just want to make sure we don't let those things slide to becoming bigger problems too as well. So can we come back to this over time and possibly?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I think we're recognizing the more rural parts of the state, the smaller parts of the state, is in that federal bridge formula program. That decision to put
That has
that
been a
money
huge
for
asset.
those local governments, small governments, and the low volume payments. You know, so I think we're doing a good job taking care of what we have. Those transportation solution projects tend to be those operational fixes. The turn lane here. So as you hear the regions ask for a transportation solutions project, that's the thing to pay attention to. Believe me, the list you see from them, they probably could go 100 projects deep from each region.
I'll say, speaking from when it was being a region director, when that program was created, it was a really big help in trying to get to some of those smaller issues. We just didn't have a way to get to them all. And anybody who is or has been a region director probably gives a thumbs up for that program because it allows you to solve a lot of problems.
I've been involved on that project.
And some of those problems are asset problems.
Yeah,
Also,
a lot of
it's
it
not
was
just
drainage,
the
right, Rob?
debris. A lot of them are asset problems and some of them are pavement problems. And so to take that out of there, it gives us takes away some flexibility to be able to deal with those on an as-needed basis.
Which helps to explain why maybe we didn't give, when you say we only gave 3% to assets, trying to balance out all of those needs. And if we'd have given them more, we'd have had less for transportation solutions. So if there's advocates for
But
each.
that's certainly, you want to see a different scenario, the asset people can run models to show, you know, if you take a reduction of 50 million out of high volume pavement, what is that going to do over time? We believe it will cost us a lot more money as a state because it'll create a big liability of poor payments. But we can run those scenarios for your decision making.
Commissioner Menlove, thank you for the question. And the basis of your question is the numbers you'll see right here. And looking about what could we fund in these 3 years where funding's coming in, we tried to set a target here of saying, could we maintain 50? Could we maintain 50 million in there for that very purpose that you said and still get our assets to perform like we needed? So within that recommendation, that's where you're seeing was that balance Terry talked about. We were trying to maintain that balance here in these years as you make programming decisions there. And so those are the things you need to think about as this is out for the public comment and between now and May, and have conversation with us, because that's where your choices really come to. Hopefully this really helps you kind of understand where our recommendation comes from.
And Ivan, do you maybe want to speak to why transportation, it's a little, the number in 23 is actually a little high. You want to maybe speak to that? Because it looks pretty dramatic that we go from 120 to 60.
So the first year of the IIJA, the guidance in some of the programs were slow coming out, slower than our programming workshop. We didn't know what those fund types were going to require us to do. So we lumped that money, the amounts, we knew what the amounts was, but we didn't know what the purpose or intent was. So those values went into transportation solutions. So when this graphic expands out, you'll see the carbon reduction, protect, and NEVI. And you'll see carbon reduction and the protect formula programs had a 0 programming balance for last year because that value went in transportation solutions. And then from transportation solutions, we looked for projects that we could specifically target with those. The SR30 project in Region 1 was carbon reduction. Our protect was the Ryan Head
SR 143.
143 in Region 4, that we could use use that value specifically for those projects. So rather than continuing where there was specific intent on those for those projects, rather than putting those in transportation solutions and then trying to find projects that we could use those funding on, it was determined we'd be better off targeting those types of programs with the value and leaving the flexibility in transportation solutions, which everyone values, leaving that alone, which makes that number look a lot less because of that change.
Yeah. So commissioners, we'll show you what that looks like in the next couple of slides, right after we do these two, because they come up next.
And one more thing, in 2023, we also played a little bit of catch up because the value of IIJA came in higher than we had projected. So we had some value in our federal program that we had not yet programmed the year before. So that rolled in, just playing catch up a little bit with that value. So that number really did double down on the increase. Whereas the year before that, I think it was 86. So it just jumped up and now it's a little bit lower.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ivan. So if you think about this number was running about, 70 or 80, and then it's moved down to 50, you're like, where did the money go? And it was in these decisions to increase these programs, like the reconstruct from 50 to 70, and the pavement, has been continuing slightly more, and structures went from 63 to 78 to 83. So you can see those choices and how they affect that bottom line. All right, we're going to talk a second about the traffic and safety area. What I want to point out to you in the traffic and safety areas, first, there's this part here that we call the HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It has a asterisk by it because it has a specific amount of money that's applied to it, and the growth that you see that's shown right here, that growth is based on the federal bill increase. Okay, so there's qualifying projects for that particular money. There's also some other projects in there that are railroad crossings, again, specific amounts of money that are targeted. And then there's these 3 areas that we've got: behavioral safety, traffic signals, both the rebuilds and the new, those that are warranted, and the traffic and safety funds themselves. So the question might be, why 5 million? Okay, we think we need to increase the amount of money in the railroad crossings just slightly. We think we need to put another $1 million in the behavioral safety program, both for the expansion of the parent nights in the rural areas, as well as the safe routes to school and safe walking programs. So Troy's been talking to you each month about these, about the concerns associated with our accidents and fatality rates. And there has been discussion about trying to expand that program further throughout the state. This would be requesting money to help make that happen. Also, there continues to be two things happening in the traffic signal world. One is, as the population grows, we need more and more of those signals. And some of the signals that we have need a number of repairs and upgrades. And the cost for a lot of those traffic signal devices, both the electronics as well as signal poles and those types of things, the inflation cost over the last few years has just been enormous. And so in order to be able to try and meet the warrants and the mid-block crossings to help with active transportation and pedestrian safety, we're requesting 3.4 million of this 5 goes in that particular area, as well as then another 100,000 go into the expansion of intersection control devices and making those devices work, making timing function, and allow the traffic flow to be a little bit better than maybe it is today. Questions on why we want to put 5 million in traffic and safety programs? I got Troy and he loves to answer stuff, so.
I just want to share a comment from a mom that I work with that has 5 children that are learning how to drive. And every time she goes to one of those parent nights, she comes away a more safe driver. She also comes away a little freaked out, but she comes away a more safe driver. And so I just want to, I think it's important that that particular program be broadened as much as we can.
Sure, our goal is to get into every school.
Thank you.
Question I have is the new wrong way system that, to prevent wrong way driving on the freeways. Is this coming out of this program, out of the traffic and signals, or is that someplace else?
I'll phone a friend and have Troy answer that.
The initial project we set up was through Transportation Solutions Program funds.
All right, thank you.
Does that include the, where you said mid-block, like the hawk systems and things like that?
Yeah, more and more demand for those things.
Yeah.
Question is, 5.1 million is enough?
You can always want more, like everybody else, right? You had to compromise.
To the question that was asked earlier, there was a huge negotiation about how much to put in the assets to address this particular area, just like we were talking about transportation solutions. That these are high needs, they have important value. They allow us as citizens to be able to function and use our system differently than maybe we did before, and that we need to give a value to that that's appropriate.
I also want to add, out of respect for the commission, that we negotiate fiercely on what we think the best recommendation is. Ultimately, you guys decide what that split looks like. So just want to make sure that's clear.
And do we still try, I know in the past we've tried to work with by a school or with the cities or school districts to try to help kind of do a joint venture on those mid-block ones. I know we've done a number of those in the past, but do we have to do it all ourselves, or do we try to partner with
Region directors, how do you guys do this?
partnerships when possible? Well, I mean, we try to approach them and see if they've come and asked us, for example, if there's a school, or hopefully we'll say, well, can the district help cover part of this, and we'll cover part of this.
It's kind of a mixture.
Yeah, but so we at least ask.
Yeah.
I'd say perception wise, it's pretty tricky when people see a big $1.3 billion one-time funding number, and then you ask them to contribute $10,000, which is precious. I just like, it's tricky. Even though we can't use the money, the big money can't be used on those small things, the perception of people it's tricky to ask for money
Yeah,
sometimes.
a lot of those discussions result in us describing our funding lots. As to why we can't tap into this versus this.
All right, great. Let's talk about the traffic management section then. Within traffic management, its current fund balance this last year was 15.4 million. We're asking to move it to 25.3, nearly $10 million increase. Why do we recommend that you do that? This is a breakdown of where that money would go. First of all, 5.3 million needs to go in a change that we have from what we call in-pavement intrusive detection to radar non-intrusive detection. So just to be clear what it is, you've heard of things like loops and other things that when the car drives over them or sensors for signals and stuff, it would warn the signal to make a change, right? All that's done by radar systems now, electronic systems or cameras in some cases that are on the poles, etc. So where those used to get replaced in the pavement fund that we talked about earlier, now they don't get touched when you do the pavement because they're no longer there. So this continues to be an area as we've made a transition in our society that we need to fund. Anything else you'd say about that, Troy?
No, I think you hit it. Without that, without detection, our signals basically render themselves useless and go back to it. It's great timing and that's not efficient.
This is what tells the signal, like if you're lined up to make a left turn, if you're wondering, 5 cars back, does the signal know I need to give time for 5 cars? That's how we know whether or not how much time it is.
So the switch to radar, we moved from detection to cameras to radar has been fantastic in terms of our ability to help with mobility. But it comes at a cost we need to maintain. The second area then is that there's a change in the manual and uniform traffic control devices, or MUTCD is the term for that. It's changing how pedestrian push buttons work, and that's a mandate that we need to fund. And so there's about $800,000 that we'll take in order for us to meet that mandate.
You see that as an ongoing every year?
I think so, Troy, don't we?
It'll be until we get them all upgraded, and then at that point, we'll just continue to maintain.
But it was over a period of what 10% a year that you could fix or something? You remember, Lisa?
The 10% number was for the detection.
Oh, that's the detection.
I think the 800,000 allows us to upgrade the majority of our current push buttons, and then any new push buttons will be installed at the new requirement.
So there might be some opportunity in a future year to look at this. But one of the areas that they are having to deal with, this 3.8 million here, is about system growth and inflation. The average growth of our system, we talked about more signals being warranted, wanting more timing control and ability to improve mobility. We're growing anywhere from 2 to 6% a year in system growth in this particular area. And so being able to maintain that system growth, as well as we already talked about the inflation that's associated with a lot of this electrical equipment, as a need to increase this amount significantly from where we were before. You might have some questions about this. We'd be happy to answer them because this is it's a big request. We understand that. And happy to answer more questions.
Maybe, Troy, you could point out that there's a lot of risk associated with failure of these systems.
Yeah, I mean, like the 3.8 that Nathan mentioned, that's not just signals, that's everything from all of our intelligence to ITS devices that are out there, from our cameras to our overhead boards to that's all encompassing, and there's so many different facets in that world, and those are getting older and they're not being technology changes. So not easily, you can't just go out and work on it. You get to the point where you have to just replace it. And it's not like pavement or bridges where you can expect 45, 30 years out of some of that stuff. It's a lot less. Sometimes we can get something out 10 years. We're lucky. And that's not to say every item that's in the TMB only lasts 10 years. But we do our very best to make things last as long as we can. But the inevitable truth is that when you get to some of those devices, they just don't, you can't find somebody that's gonna take the time to work on it when you can say, you gotta replace it.
It's probably why you have 10% per year of the detection being replaced, right? Because it's about a 10-year life cycle.
Yeah, and we're at the end of those initial installations.
This is a real safety focused area, though, right?
Yes.
I mean, is that?
Everything we do off real money is.
The last, this one.
Any other questions? Okay. Couple of other items that are in there. These programs you're looking at over here on the left, these 4 programs, they're all state funded. We would recommend that within this program that you fund these 3 the same as they were in contingency at 6 instead of 6.5. Just to clarify that, why that recommendation is there is that there's $1.5 million of this that goes to each region, but there was $500,000 of this that was originally held up for a number of years for programming issues. But with the current structure we have for the commission to come and talk about projects and the authority to approve and upgrade projects that are necessary, it's not necessary to keep that $500,000 in the programming reserve. So it's a place that puts a little bit more money back in transportation solutions or some of those other needs, but this would be our recommendation in terms of meeting these 4 areas. And then these projects all have those asterisks, and this is what Ivan referred to a little bit earlier. You'll see that here were some projects where the numbers were 0. Well, these projects have an amount of money that needs to be spent throughout that 5-year bill. And so we identified a couple of projects that were actually funded after these zeros were programmed last year. So there is money there now. And that's what drew down some of the transportation solutions. And you'll see going forward in May that there will be requests come in for all of these different categories for types of projects that qualify for that money to be funded with that money.
Is it hard to find projects that meet that criteria?
It's not hard,
Criteria?
but some of those project criteria that were established, I think our federal highways friends are here. They want to assure that when the money's programmed, that it meets a certain set of criteria. So it's taken some time for the agency when they got the new bill to establish a criterion that would show that the projects we chose meet the criteria they established. And one of the reasons that last year was a bit of a challenge too is when a new bill comes out, they don't give federal highways all the answers with the new bill. So within that first year of the bill, they were spending time figuring out exactly what some of that criteria would be and working with states and how they would do that. So that's why there was a little bit of delay in there. And to Ivan's point about why money was sort of piled up there and is now going to be allocated this year in these categories, it needs to be spent specifically in those areas for those reasons. And we definitely have projects to do in there. In fact, we have lists. I was just looking at the Protect list that'll come in May yesterday, and there's more projects on the list than this entire funding will allow. So there's no question that there's available work. We just needed to get it categorized so we can make good recommendations, both for us and for our federal partners, about how we use that money.
Was at the commission meeting in Cedar City where we were sitting around the table trying to figure out what we programmed. And I think, Monty, you guys had some good things in Region 4, but some of them were fairly small. And we're just like, that's not probably in the fit use of federal money. So we just have to be careful which projects we put it on sometimes. But yeah, plenty of needs out there.
So that covers us from the top of the asset chart all the way down to what's remaining in flexible transportation project needs. And now you can see these numbers in orange are now in black in terms of all of those recommendations we had for each of those spaces. So the reason that there's 3 orange years again in these is because we didn't program them previously. Otherwise, you would just see orange in the new year that's available to us for the item. So I just leave it open if there's any more questions or observations you have that you want the department to look at. Now that we've given you an overview of how we'd recommend you fund
that Commissioner Nagy, now would be the time for y'all to have that discussion.
Commissioners?
I don't think they've held back the question.
Well, I got my box checked, so who wants the?
No, it's Kevin. Kevin?
Lisa authorized that? Did Lisa authorize that? No.
I appreciate the in-depth that you've spent with us. How you've stepped to these recommendations. It's a tough program, but for me personally, I want to tell UDOT I appreciate their fullness and thoroughness and looking at these, and some of it I've got to chew on a little bit more, but I understand where it's coming from. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And as we mentioned earlier, over the next 2 months, please bring those questions forward. Or if you want to see a different scenario looked at, we'll be happy to provide those for you so that by May you can hopefully approve a recommendation.
Thank you.
I think the difficulty that we have as a commission, this program is so vast that we can take some unflows that might be, as we've stated earlier today, would be generating a bigger liability down the road. So thank you for your in-depth discussion.
Do we maybe throw out there, does anybody do we want to take a break?
No, I think, maybe before we do that, did we have the discussion? I was late, so I know it's hard to believe. But, we're talking the programming level, and then there's going to be the next step of the projects within the program. Did we have that discussion?
We did a little bit, and then I think we put the slide at the end again so that we can kind of remind as we get to the end. But I think the point, Carlos is trying to make is these would help set the program dollar amount so that we can then come back and show you what projects we might do within that dollar amount.
Because the modeling, that asset modeling is using, at a program system level. And so that's why those dollars in a pavements or bridges at a system level, we get some program numbers, and then we have to get the right projects to be able to meet those targets. Want to do 10 minutes? 10 minutes?
10 minutes break.
I've got 11 o'clock, so 11:10.
Yeah, and reminder, drinks in the refrigerator back here and snacks out front, so. That was an hour.
Terry just said, whatever study.
I was just, phone call from President Adams. And he was moving around, he wanted to stop by, spend time here, he has pictures up there, wall, former chair, but this message is to the commission, thank you. Thank you for what you do and for what you still have in front of you. So. you wanna pass that on?
Okay, so we're going back to talk about all of the things. Transportation Investment Fund, Transit Transportation Investment Fund, Cottonwood Canyons Transportation Investment Fund, and the Active Transportation Investment Fund, which is the new fund created during this last session. So going back to our $2 billion pie, we'll talk about the Transportation Investment Fund first. That's the large blue section making up 49% of our budget. That is highway capacity projects that the commission programs. So as far as revenue coming into that fund, the largest portion, 83%, is sales tax, and then we have some registration increases and motor gas tax that's transferred from the transportation fund.
Ivan, you know,
There we go.
all you had to do was just talk to me.
They both did it, I don't know. As far as expenditures out of that fund, right now, we have 28% goes to bond payments, 10%, 11% of that funding is transferred out to other funds, and then there's a small portion that's an ongoing cut from COVID, and then the rest of the funding, about 61%, is spent on projects. Even, I think, I don't know. Okay. The one-time funding, that's just going back to our whole big pie, that 800 million that went to TIF. I think Terry, you're going to talk about that.
Okay, so we already talked to you about the legislated projects for money that went into transportation fund. So this is the legislated money that went into transportation investment fund. The project, the Tokerville Parkway project, and I may do my phone a friend with Lisa on this one as well. But it was legislated that we pay for project utility costs for that project, and we have a very detailed amount there, $7,041,000. There is an item on the commission agenda tomorrow for Tokerville Parkway, and Lisa, maybe do you want to explain that one? Or do you?
Yeah, so what you'll see tomorrow for Tokerville, and it's in two pieces, the legislated piece for the utilities. The other one is the roadway, increases in roadway costs. Right, that's something that typically we would come to you to cover, and so that's following the normal process, but utilities is not. And so it was legislated to cover that, but you'll see that on the commission fact sheet.
So the road portion of it is for the phase one or for the phase two?
Both phases, right, Roger?
It's for package A and B of phase one. So phase one is to build 2 lanes, but phase two is to at some point in time in the future to have 4 lanes. But phase one was distributed into package A and package B.
If you'll remember, this project was probably last year. The intent is that we this then becomes state road, and the state road that goes to downtown Tokerville would be transferred.
Didn't we already sign a transfer?
We said you the intent, we approved the intent.
Oh,
The
intent.
commission will see that action at some point.
No new reservoir up along there somewhere too.
It's a junction.
There is a reservoir plan. Along it.
I think that's a little farther north.
Just to look, yeah. Up there and everything.
And I will say on this one, this is we aren't bringing you all the projects that were legislated to your commission meeting tomorrow, just this one, because there was an urgent need for the money and it was already coming in front of us to review for the commission meeting. So anyway, that's why you're seeing this one as the legislated money and then us asking you to take action tomorrow.
Nope, it stopped, sorry. It worked and then it stopped.
Okay, the next one is a transportation pass-through for 14 million. This one is, it seems like an odd description. It's a road that angles southeasterly, and anyway, the money is a pass-through, will go directly to the city of Harriman and be managed by them. So that will come out of TIF. The next one lists two projects for a dollar amount. This one will come to the commission for approval. So this is $100 million that is to be used for an interchange upgrade that has an environmental analysis complete and has a substantial right-of-way donation. So we are trying to suggest here that language means the I-15 Payson interchange. So we give you the intent language and then we give you what we think that interpretation means. We will come back with a suggestion. Ivan, it will be May or June when we do probably June for action.
Well, we're still have to work through, make sure that the substantial right-of-way donation.
Yeah, so this also clarifies if there's not a substantial right-of-way donation, then this doesn't happen, but we have to figure out what that split of the $100 million between these two items is, and that is something that the commission will take action on to set the dollar amounts. So everything we do at the commission, we want to clarify the scope and the dollar amount. There will be a little scope clarification and dollar amount that occurs with this item. So that will come back we'll show a dollar amount at the workshop in May as our recommendation, and then it will be for approval by the commission in June.
Could you just clarify what on the West Davis corridor, is this an extension someplace or a?
It's the next segment of the corridor that
Okay.
hasn't been studied.
North to south.
North of where the existing project is. Well, but there's the current environmental approval, because the current project under construction does not complete the existing approved units.
Oh.
So there's really, I would anticipate there'll be, the commission will be looking to fund that piece at some point, probably sooner than later. But then now we want to look farther north of that currently approved environmental corridor.
Thank you. Okay, the next one, another legislated project, is for an environmental analysis on I-15 at Santaquin Main Street. I'm sure from our commission meeting we had in Santaquin, you're very familiar with the concerns and issues of the community there. So $4 million towards the environmental analysis. This will come back to you as FYI, since it is a project that we will be managing, but the scope and funding level are already set. That's why it won't come back for approval, but will come back for FYI since we are managing it.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the TIF fund, of our $2 billion pie. It's a smaller portion, it's about 2.5% of our budget as a newer and smaller fund. So the revenue coming in is sales tax that is transferred from TIF, and it is entirely used on projects No, sorry, I made an update on this and I didn't do it in time. My apologies. It is entirely used on projects except for 3 million, that was appropriated ongoing this session to be transferred back to the transportation fund, into engineering services to stand up a transit, that Josh will be over.
Wait, no, Chair, you said those were ongoing funds?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So it'll staff those actions
People.
back in the.
People.
Yep.
And I would say that we are not planning to do any programming of the ongoing funds this year. As you're aware, we are working on some modifications to the prioritization process, and we'll be looking towards the next programming workshop to do more programming of our regular TTIF, asking for applications. And I'm looking at Andrea to verify that what I say is correct, that we will be looking for applications later in the year.
We just sent out an email, letting people know that we expect that nomination window to be open in May and for, a couple months. But Terry's correct that we don't anticipate funding until the next, cycle.
And we will be coming back with the prioritization process.
Lots
And
of prioritization.
lots of prioritization process or update to simplify the process.
Of the $1.2 billion one-time funding we received, 200 million of that went to TTIP. And Terry will talk about that.
Yeah, so this money was for a front runner station at the point of the mountain. And we do put a note here because we always want to leave our trail of breadcrumbs that what was legislated was 200 million, but the project cost is actually 400 million. So just want to make sure that that's the footnote you see at the bottom. That's written actually larger than the rest of the text. So that
Very clear.
So that would be a project that we would get started on, knowing that we don't have all of the money available for it, but it does require a fair amount of additional double tracking to keep the timing of the trains appropriate, so that it looks like an expensive project for a front runner station, but it's actually going to help us in the future with the whole front runner system, because it will get us that additional double tracking, which does nothing but help the entire system.
So what will happen with the remaining of 200,000? Who's gonna give us that?
Yet to be determined.
Check in the mail.
Fair,
right?
Carlos?
We're working.
The next one is our Cottonwoods Canyons CC-TIF. Of our overall $2 billion budget, it is a smaller portion, again, a newer fund, 1% of our budget. And the revenue comes from sales tax from TIF. It is capped at $20 million a year, which we've reached, so we just anticipate $20 million every year. This one, again, I made an update, but too late, but we do have, no, we don't have an update. All of that money will be used on projects. So we've had this fund for a couple of years. We haven't had authority to spend out of it, I think as Carlos said earlier. We did receive authority to spend out of it in FY24. So on the next slide, we received 100 million of one-time funding, which Terry will explain on the next slide, we used.
Okay, so this one's also, everything is complicated. So we have 100 million. I'll look to share it again, make sure I get this correct. We have 100 million in general funds. And I think they went into CC-TIF, or where are they going? They're going into CC-TIF, which I guess gives us the authority to also spend them out of there, but we are also authorized now to spend 50 million of what will be collected in CC-TIF, which gives us 150 million to use for very specific things. It is enhanced bus service, tolling, a mobility hub, and resort bus stops for both Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons. So it can't be used on anything but those items. We do put the note again at the bottom that says this isn't, also there's a caveat to this one. The project total to deliver all that is not 200 million. It is actually more than that. It assumes some reprogramming of the funds out of the recreation hotspot funds that the commission programmed to Little Cottonwood Canyon 4 or 5 years ago. So anyway, combination of sources here. Ultimately, we'll have to do some work. Josh will have to do some work and his team on figuring out how we spend this amount of money. Likely we'd come back to the commission and talk about also spending the money out of the recreation hotspot money, pair it with this to get the project.
Well, this is a portion of what we identify as phase 1 in the final EIS. And so we're anticipating getting the record decision sometime summer of this year. And so this would allow us to move forward on that phase, what's identified as phase 1 in the final.
Okay, and our last fund that we'll talk about of the TIFs is the new Active Transportation Investment Fund. They've touched on this in his presentation earlier. Overall, this is a smaller fund, a smaller portion of our budget, about 2.2%. And on the next slide, we can see that there is ongoing revenue. Again, that's sales tax transfers from TIF into this fund of $45 million annually. And we will primarily use this on projects. There will be $900,000 ongoing that will be transferred back into transportation funds, much like TTIF, to staff some people for the ATIF group. We also received on the next slide one-time funding of $45 million into this fund, and Terry will talk about that.
So there was legislated out of that the money, the one-time money going to ATIF project for $17 million for Provo Canyon Trail reimbursement. So this money, we have a note at the bottom, it will be passed through to Mountain Land Association of Governments, and there isn't any commission action required on the $17 million. There's an extra zero where, oh,
I thought it was just my glasses or lack thereof.
Peter, that was clipped right out of the extra zero on the 17.
They did that on another one too. You're
Yeah.
supposed to ignore the extra zero.
That's what I said. But if we want to be factually correct here, we should not ignore the extra zero.
I was told that it doesn't change the amount because of the columns.
And I gave it 170 million to Magna.
Oh, okay, yeah, we do.
Follow the columns, not the.
Follow the columns.
And Andrew's going away president or?
There is going to be action on this project tomorrow.
Yes.
Rob, do you want to take a second? I mean, that's not related to this action.
Yeah, as I understand it, this relates to the funding that MAG had previously assigned to the project or contributed. But the project itself still is underfunded. It's suffering from the same challenges of inflation and the issues that we're seeing on all of our projects. So we'll talk about that much more.
So the end result of this is instead of Josh having 90 million to get spent in 1 year, he has 90 million minus 17 million. So
Which is still amazing.
which is still
And I think that finishes up the TIFs. Yeah, sorry, I should have meant to click on that. So of the original Transportation Investment Fund, the TIF, the 800 million we received one time. Terry went through the other specific legislative projects. The rest of it is to use to be paid off of our bonds, which is a larger portion of what that fund is being used for right now. So we will be able to free up what we would have paid on bonds to advance projects, accelerate projects.
And I think we will, Lisa, we're gonna talk about projects in May about, because our goal would be to, we programmed out to 2030 at one point, and inflation is, it's difficult to be programmed into 2030 and be able to keep a handle on any kind of cost on projects. We'd really love to get projects pulled from 2030 and move those forward and not be programmed out that far. That would be kind of our encouragement going forward, is that we don't get programmed out further than 5 or 6 years, because it really is hard to try to manage those costs. We're going to be chasing inflation on all those projects because we didn't inflate any of those projects at the amount of inflation we're currently seeing. So we want to get those. Our whole goal is, if there's extra money in there, move stuff up so we're not continuing to fight inflation.
Will we be eliminating our bonding altogether or just paying off some things early?
It'll,
We're at 1.7 billion right now in outstanding debt. So our bond payment in 2024 was 318, goes up to, I think, 340 in 25. So this 800 million is a good down payment to accelerate. Now, there was also some very unique language that I've never seen before, and I don't know how it's going to play out, but I can imagine some discussions that took place around this. But the legislature basically said that there's 1.2 or 1.1 billion that can't be accessed until 10 days into the 2024 legislative session. That's normally when the base budget bill is pushed through. That would also go towards debt relief. So that would basically, and what they're thinking is that money goes to the treasurer, invest it, and free up that amount of debt payment. So it's not like we would have this huge pile of cash to roll around. But we'll have to see where the states, what the budget looks like next year, what the revenues look like, whether or not that's even close to being realized. Have their normal budget discussions to see if that realm can be tied to that. It was interesting conversations between people who didn't want to overspend and wanted to pay down debt.
So will there be a reprioritization process when we look ahead at projects that are on the list?
We could, and I think I would suggest that not be done until next year around this time, because again, we're programmed out 7+ years. We normally go 5 years out, and even 5 years is a long ways out to try to manage. You know, we built 5% of cost escalation per year, and more than double that. We have $5 billion of projects programmed out that far. When is that line in the curve we put together? When's that gonna curve down a little bit? We don't know. So we're not proposing to program new projects.
Right, but I mean, just repreg.
Well, we would come back to the commission because we manage the timing of the projects. You pick the projects. We would come back to the commission and say, these are the projects that we want to accelerate.
Okay.
So
I'm
it'd be-
just
it'd be a
wondering what the process
conversation.
would be.
It would be when you think about the types of projects, it's gonna be ones that are probably have the environmental document done, they're in the right phasing to be able to build it relative to the construction going on in the surrounding areas.
So maybe just to clarify, because we do sometimes get the question as part of prioritization, we're not gonna, anything that's been programmed, we're not looking to reprogram. Whatever's programmed, we say is stay solid, we will deliver that. It's just an issue of what we decide to move up. And that'll be discussions we'll have between now and May internally, and come back with what we think is the right list to move up. And then when we have a updated long-range plan, which we do every 4 years, we'll marry that with Andrea will marry that with an updated prioritization process. So we'll potentially have a new list late
in the fall. We wait for MPO partners for their long range plans as well.
So we're thinking there will be a new list that you could prioritize projects off of late next year that would then be used for programming workshop a year from now. So we don't have all those programs where you guys have discretion on projects to program. We don't have a lot of those because we did program everything out so far. But I think starting next year, we'll probably have some options there, at least in the TTIF program. TIF, we'll just have to see where we are.
ATIF, we're gonna be wanting to bring those to the commission.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I already forgot,
Sooner than
ATIF.
later. I mean, because that's a lot of money to try to get out the door quickly, so we're gonna have to figure out some way of making recommendations. Josh.
Yeah, and I think generally there's some language in there that, Peter, I think that we have language in there in the bill about ATIF that talks about using the commission's prioritization process.
Yeah.
So whatever way we
But the
prioritize
statute
it
requires,
would be something we run through the commission.
Yeah.
Not just the projects, but the process that we use. Either we use the process we already have in place and it may just have a different input list based on the needs of the program, or anyway, yet to be determined, but the process will come through the commission as well as the projects that eventually get programmed.
And just in terms so you know the approach I would take, we're gonna consider that 800 million in the bank and look at what our debt payments are, say that amount will probably get us 3 years. 2.5, just under 3. Freeing up debt payments for 3 years. So we'll look at that cash flow as available to accelerate projects. We're not gonna look at the 1.1 and think we have that in the bank. That's based on. We're gonna wanna look at it and be ready, but that's a hard one to assume.
I'm gonna just suggest that it may not be the full 800 million because we're still struggling with the inflation costs and we need to make sure that we're programming inflation that we're leaving some room that we could come back to you and ask for more money on some of those future projects that we know they're gonna have funding issues, but it's probably premature to come back and ask for money for something that hasn't been designed yet, so. Caveat.
Does that make sense?
Did we want to, maybe Commissioner Van Tassel, if you haven't had a chance to chime in, if you had questions?
Looks to me like we're waiting for final information. I think I'm okay for right now. Did you hear me?
Yes. Did you add the last slide in there, but you are without a mouse for the second? Oh, right there. Carlos, I think this was where you were.
No, just to kind of clarify what we see going forward.
Yeah, so we've talked about lots of programs today, and then we would bring the program recommendations, go look to Ivan and make sure I'm reading this correctly. We're gonna come back to the commission for approval of the programming values in the May meeting. And we'll also come back with project lists at the May workshop the day before.
But not asking for approval for those projects at that point.
The approval for the project detail would be in June.
But again, as I think Nathan said, if there's any scenarios you'd like to have run over the next month and a half, questions, let us know. We'll get that information out to all the commissioners.
So we have, this is back to our commission webpage again, and see how that showmanship works a little bit. While we've been talking, this has now been updated. So this link under the Transportation Commission webpage, this link takes us to the presentation that was produced today or shared today, as well as the links that we start working through in our workshop process. So these are live now.
This is open to all the public in the state of Utah.
Right.
Everywhere. Around the world to those interested.
Yeah. So that's all we had. We're happy to try to answer any questions or have discussions on any other topics that commissioners might have. President Jim?
Well, good, yeah, I have a question.
Region directors should be a good resource for you, or Terry, at least myself.
Yeah, notice who we sit next to.
Tell us about your snow budget and snow removal and snow and all this stuff and salt. And what do you have to face and what is your expectations?
As Nathan opens the computer. Central maintenance sits in under Nathan's group. So when you saw that pie chart that Sheriff gave us on the different line items, the operation and maintenance is where all that snow budget. So that's where all the people in maintenance and construction sit. There's probably 700 people in there. That's where we buy all our equipment out of. That's where we buy all the salt out of. And so that's what we use to fund our snow and ice program. Nathan, are you do you have some? Oh, okay. Oh, thanks.
I know, 3 weeks, you were already 3 million over the budget, so let's see what else you have.
Well, realize, so operation and maintenance, see that's $208 million. And so part of the central maintenance function is to look at the asset conditions, to look at the history and to make projections in terms of how much to allocate to different programs within the line item. We do not have authority as a department or a commission to move money across line items. But we do have the ability to move money within line items. So we're managing that operation and maintenance budget. Nathan, what did we put snow and ice this year? 28 million?
This is second on today.
Or bottom, I don't know if you have anything in front of you there. While he's hunting. Bottom line is we monitor where we're at in terms of expenditures constantly. The regions have maintenance analysts that are doing this, at their level. We have central office doing it here. And what we'll do is we will take care of what we need to do. We're not going to stop plowing. What it might mean is we're going to do less hard surface work between now and the end of the state fiscal year. You might see us, we've used the term past, it's, our folks hate it, but labor intensive activities, because when we do an activity, we have to pay for the equipment, materials, and the people. And we'll allocate, if we're running low on money, we're going to manage to the budget we have. There's no lifesaver to be thrown here. We are recognizing that we could be dealing with flooding, landslides. And so we're trying to set money aside for those contingencies. But it means we're going to do less of the maintenance work that we would typically do in the May, June time. And as we get closer to the end of the year, as our risks are reduced from weather events, we then will, the central office will work with the regions in terms of, okay, comfortable with you, go ahead and spend X more dollars here. So it's something we manage very well. If you want to explain your S curve.
Yeah, so I just, you asked where we are with snow billion budget this year. The red line there represents where they're at right now, right at around 35 million. There you can see how each year tracks. Just thought I'd give you a little bit of flavor about how those years track and where they lay out. Of course, down here you can see, total amounts of money in a given year, but last year we'd spent 19.7 million at this point in the year, and we've spent 34.6 million this year. So as Carlos was mentioning, it's a significant amount. We're making significant adjustments to how we end the year to accommodate. But yeah, it's significant in every part of the department. But I thought that graph would really answer your question. How are we doing with snow? We're doing great.
Just a great amount of gratitude for the snow removal. Living in an area where,
You get a bit?
yes, a significant amount of snow. It's just been really helpful to have that, and the monitoring, the websites that tell people how the road conditions are, whoever posts on those, and Facebook and all those things. It's so helpful because we have significant number of older people living in the Bear Lake area, which is a bit surprising in a way, but they depend on the roads being plowed and they depend on good communication, and it's just been great.
We do, that $800,000 item when we talked about, you know, recommendations for communications. That's part of how we're able to do this, to communicate these operational issues as well as the projects.
That's great. It's very helpful.
Commission help.
Thank you.
Carlos, one of the things that I would make a comment on, back in 82, 83, we had a similar winter. And I remember we had a storm come through and Strawberry was actually on Highway 40 was closed for 3 days, blown shut. And they finally put together some snow blowers and things, and they started running some truck convoys through there to get supplies out to the basin. UDOT's done a great job in upgrading and maintaining their equipment. And, you know, I think back to the 80s and to compared to today, we had almost no wing plows. And so your crew, we not only have great crews, but we have great equipment to support them and let them do their jobs. And that's been critical this winter.
You know, Kevin, that's a good observation. I think it was 2015, 2016, there was a legislative performance audit. And, you know, one of the things that they looked at was how we were buying equipment. And at that time, we had a separate line item for equipment. And it really made it difficult because we were also charging our activities against that equipment. We were trying to move money from the operations side where we were collecting that money from into this line item. So one of the recommendations out of that was to fold the equipment in as a program into the operations line item. And it's really allowed us, I think, to optimize our equipment purchases. We are spending more on equipment than we ever have, and our equipment is better. And, quite frankly, it's really important for people to have the right tools.
Just to add to that, two things. You had mentioned, what, 23 straight days without a break for the staff and snowplow. And then I doubt we planned for 4 avalanches up in Region 3 either. You know, so the Daniels and the Purple Canyon ones and just things like that. We worked in it somehow.
That's one of those things that I think it's like a specific shout out. Like I'd like to give is just the avalanche crews. You know, we talk about monitoring like snowplow operations, like just when it snows, they're monitoring avalanche conditions continuously right now. And like the slides that we're getting down in Little Cowboy Canyon are no longer, the average is 10 feet tall, right? So, I mean, it's been impressive.
Well, they're forecasting and the control activities that they do, they're doing those knowing that another storm is coming. So they're not only looking at what's there, but they're projecting what's coming. And then what do they need to do to keep something from happening after the storm happens? You know, they really are fantastic. They're doing a great job.
You know, life and death decisions they make on a continual basis.
Good question. What else? Lunch?
I guess the last comment that I would make would be is we needed the water, we have the snow, and Carlos, you and your team have performed exceptionally. And, you know, we did that without a trial run. Last year was nothing compared to this year. So it speaks highly of our organization and what we're doing.
Thank you, Kevin. It's and I think it was also done at a time when we've never been so stretched in being able to attract and retain employees. So it's amazing people out there. We're very lucky. Third direction. Heather?
Lunch is ready to go. We need lunch.
We start normal time tomorrow, 8:30, right?
8:30.
I'll try to be. I wasn't bringing that up. I just think of myself.
That's right.